Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, residential loan officer and real estate investor based out of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Today I'm bringing a solo episode talking about my experiences, pros and cons of doing my first residential single-family flip. There's a lot of things that I learned throughout the process that I thought I would have already known or I thought might not have been a concern of mine. If you have interest in flipping properties, you're definitely going to want to hear some of the things I wish I would have done differently and how you can make sure your investment is a slam dunk. Stay tuned and enjoy the show. So we're filming this episode on June 12th, which a week from today I'll be closing on the sale of my first single-family flip. Now, there's a lot of things that I learned throughout this process that I probably assumed I already would know. I thought I would really have a full grasp of the process before I got into it, but there's definitely things that you go through in the real estate flipping space that you just have to learn by doing. Up until this point, I had a lot of experience doing, residential unit turns, like turning multifamily properties, like kitchens, bathrooms, decks, but more light cosmetic type stuff. When it comes to a flip, depending on the scope of work, it can be very involved. And there's different metrics and obstacles you have to be wary of because of the short timeline and turnaround that a flip is on. Now for me, this property, I actually put it under contract about 2 years ago. It took 2 years to close. We had some probate challenges, a little bit of title issues, and overall just a slower transactions for some personal reasons with the seller. But in the end, it closed in January. We're under contract in June, and we'll be selling out in the next week or so. Now, it was a successful flip. Thankfully, we're going to make money on the property, and we did well. But it wasn't the smoothest ride as far as what I thought it would be. And the numbers that I originally budgeted were definitely not accurate in the end. We went way over budget on a lot of different things. And it really came down to, I'd say, these three categories. So number one, when you're underwriting a flip, you have to account for carrying costs. So carrying costs are the amount of money you pay each day just to own the property. So not counting construction, not counting labor, materials, just if you didn't do anything to the property and left it vacant, how much does it cost you to own? So you have to pay electric. If it's in the winter, you have to keep the heat on. So you might have to fill the oil tank. Then you have to pay real estate taxes, you have to pay interest if you're borrowing money. Landscaping costs if you're keeping the yard maintained. So there's a lot of things that go into that number that you really want to make sure you account for. And every day longer you hold the property, you don't sell, of course, adds to that carrying cost bucket. So you want to make sure that you fully budget for all of those items. One thing that I don't think I was prepared for as I was underwriting my carrying costs was the cost to keep the heat on, because heating, of course, in the winter for contractors to work is necessary. But the property, I didn't realize in my head as I ran the numbers, was going to be vacant with a lot of walls open and exposed. So the heating cost was so much higher because we were losing heat like crazy. So we ended up going through several tanks of oil, hundreds and hundreds of gallons of oil, and it cost the couple $1,000s that we didn't include for it. So definitely, as you're underwriting your property, think about logistically what other items you, aside from your interest and your real estate taxes and insurance, are you going to have to pay to carry the property. So think heating, think landscaping, think electric. Those types of things definitely add up, and you want to make sure you account for them. I'd say the biggest thing that I wasn't quite including in my underwriting, now granted, as you underwrite flips, you should definitely build in at least a 15 to 20% contingency in additional funds that you could run over into as part of the project. So example, you budget $100,000, you should be underwriting the property at least $120,000 renovation budget, because you want to make sure you account for those extra things that haven't come up yet or could come up down the line. And that second piece for me that really ate up all of that reserve and contingency was code violations. So for those who aren't familiar, at least in the markets we operate in, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, it's very much town to town on how they'll view pre-existing code violations when it comes to things like plumbing, electrical, and structural. But in this particular case, what ended up happening was I had made a budget according to plumbing repairs. Now, the plumbing repairs we were doing were fairly small in scope, a bathroom renovation, some toilet replacements and sinks, minor things. But what ended up happening was when the plumber actually came in after we closed on the property to really look at everything, because of course everything we were doing as always is permitted, when the inspector from the town comes out to check that work, they're not only just looking at the work you did, they're looking at the work that's already existed in the property. And if, depending on how much work you're doing, they might require, which they did in our case, you bring all of the plumbing work that they can see or that interacts with your new plumbing work up to code. So that was a huge expense that we did not plan for. And our plumbing budget almost tripled because we're now doing a lot more work that was originally outside of our scope. So I think it's just really important, especially if you're newer in real estate investing or newer as a flipper, to make sure you build time in your due diligence period to get those experts out there. You want your subs to actually go to the property and see, are there any plumbing concerns? If you have a question about structural, foundation, bring out a mason, bring out a structural expert when it comes to those types of things to get real numbers, because that was an unforeseen cost for us. Now, the final thing that I think is really important that I didn't quite necessarily understand is the coordination of different subcontractors, because things have to happen in a certain order. And if you're not working with a GC that's overseeing the whole project and they're kind of quarterbacking the whole thing, it falls on you. So for example, if you, let's say, ripped a wall down, well, if you put your electrical in before your plumbing, well, now you're gonna have to move the electrical if the plumbing stack can't go in the spot they thought it was going to. Or if, let's say, for some reason you put, I don't know, the cabinets in before the floor, like obviously that's a problem, right? So those types of things, they all have to work in cohesion together and they have to go in a certain order. And because we were managing some of the subs ourselves, in hindsight, we now understand we probably would have done things a little bit differently in terms of the order of operations and the communication between the teams. So we actually had a situation where the sub who was doing some of the power washing on the exterior turned the water on to get access to the power washer. Well, the plumber was not yet through plumbing inspection on the hose lines he was using, so it caused it to leak within the house. So we had to clean all of that up. Luckily, the damage was fairly minor, just some extra paint. But like that could have been a huge mistake, and the only real difference was it wasn't communicated across the different teams. So we should have alerted everyone, hey, we're not through plumbing inspection yet. Some of the plumbing isn't able to be used, so don't turn on the water. And told our other sub that was what was going on. Because you get some of those disconnects, and sometimes you have to do things over again, backtrack and replace things or repair things and work you already just completed and paid for. So the coordination aspect was definitely something that I don't think I understood fully comparative to like renovating an apartment, where a lot of times you're just, paint, floor, fixtures, and maybe some windows. You're not doing a major overhaul of an apartment like you would be a flip where you're fully gutting a bathroom to the studs, replacing a roof. It's a little bit different. So those are my 3 things that I'd recommend to you if you're thinking about flipping a house that you should make sure you get right, you get in place, and you have a plan for before you actually buy the property. So give yourself a good due diligence period to make sure you're getting proper professionals in there to budget each line item accordingly. Get your plumber in there, get your electrician in there, get a contractor in there to evaluate the things you're going to do and make sure your budget aligns with the actual. Second piece, again, make sure you budget your carrying costs accordingly. Think about the market you're in, the type of season you're in, and make sure you account for all of the costs, not just interest, insurance, and taxes, but your heating, your landscaping. Making sure all of those things are accounted for can make or break some of your bottom line numbers. The last piece, of course, the coordination. Making sure you have a plan for how you're going to communicate with all of your different subs, keep everyone on the same page, and get things done in the right order. Make a timeline, make a table. That's something I'll do next time for sure, is make a task tracker of here's the different phases of the project, here's who needs to be there, what needs to be done and in what order, so that I can quarterback more efficiently. And in the same token, as you're doing that, making the full table allows you to pick up on some potential things you might have missed as part of your budget or as part of your underwriting. For example, one thing that I overlooked was landscaping, right? Everyone thinks about flipping a house. They think about kitchens and bathrooms and roofs, siding, windows, but the landscaping. I mean, we ended up spending almost $5,000 in landscaping, plus a new driveway, which is another $4,000 or $5,000. So that's $10,000 in exterior work that I had in my head, but I didn't quite budget that much. I wasn't planning for it to cost that much. But in the end, those were all things that I think helped sell the house and were definitely needed. But think about the landscaping. Think about the exterior. Those costs definitely add up. As always, if you have questions, you want to talk more about real estate, or you want to come on the podcast as a guest, shoot me a DM on Instagram, reach out to me with my contact in the show notes below. See you on the next one.